Here to give us his thoughts is Greg Swenson, chairman of Republicans Overseas. Greg, thank you for giving us your time. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, Alexis. Thanks for having me.
What do you make of the charges, Greg?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it. There's a strictly legal aspect, and if you just look at this from a technical perspective, there's a lot more meat on the bone on this case than the other sort of ridiculous or almost laughable charges like the Alvin Bragg indictment. If they really want to, so-called get Trump, this is probably the most likely case to actually get him if they were to stick to the letter of the law on every detail. There are some counts in this indictment that you could argue are valid, but the other aspect is the political and the perception that this is a two-tiered system of justice and that there is a double standard. When you look at, I hate to go into whataboutism, but if you look at whether these standards are applied to people on the left, to Democrats like Hillary Clinton, like President Biden, and that's where I think it's going to run into some headwinds. It's easy to say that he violated some rule, some abstract. I think they're using the Espionage Act, which is rarely used in prosecution and especially in a document case. So there are some flaws with the legal argument, but it's surely not as laughable or laughable at all compared to some of the other stuff they've thrown at Trump over the years, for 7 years now.
Greg, we'll find out more and more detail as I think President Trump is due to appear in court on Tuesday in Florida. But, I mean, some of the indictments include things like false statements, obstruction of justice, illegal retention of classified documents, which we were talking about in the boxes spread around all over Mar-a-Lago, plus also conspiracy. There are, again, unverified reports coming out saying that he was heard talking about showing Pentagon plans to people, saying, well, I really shouldn't, but here they are, talking about America's response to certain countries, military response I'm talking about. Again, things that are very, very sensitive and could actually compromise the American nation. So, I mean, I hear you saying, well, is the same letter of the law being applied to both sides? But does it matter? I mean, the law is the law. And if he's found to have broken it, then that's a very, very serious thing to say about the president.
No, you have some points. And I think if they were able to nail him on actually selling or providing delicate secrets to an enemy of some sort, then absolutely, that would be the proper application of the Espionage Act. But for the most part, it's interesting that the indictment didn't include anything about the Presidential Records Act, and the PRA is important, and that's the Congress wrote it so that presidents could take documents legally. And so, it doesn't allow vice presidents or senators to do that. And that's where you get into the conflict or the argument about the double standard. But, so there's some gray area there. And I think if as someone who's a big supporter of, defense and national security, I would be suspicious, even with Trump's sort of cavalier or, reckless way of having these conversations. He likes to brag, he likes to talk up his book. So, that would bother me. But is it impeachable? Is it, worthy of an indictment? There has to be some discretion used, prosecutorial discretion. And that's why James Comey passed on the Hillary Clinton case, because he said, no prosecutor, no rational prosecutor would pursue this. So that's the big question. It's a little gray, and I think there's some precedent here.
I'm going to sort of use your phrase, not mine, Greg. At the beginning of the interview, you said, for fear of going to whataboutism, we are talking about President Trump. These are very serious allegations. In the indictment memo, there's even talk of him traveling with some of these boxes with the documents, which, again, throws some very, very interesting questions. Why on earth would he be traveling around the country with these boxes? He's also accused of hiding them or sort of not being entirely honest about the boxes to his own lawyers, who on several occasions told him that he really needs to hand everything back. let's, as we said, we're going to find out more on Tuesday when
Yeah,
President Trump shows up on court. Let's talk about the Republican Party, though, Greg. From your point of view, where you're sitting as the chairman of Republicans overseas, what does this do to Trump's base? Does it feed them with more fervor that their man is being attacked, all linked to the election that was supposedly stolen, even though no one actually can put forward any credible evidence that that is the case? Is this going to strengthen his base, or are people now going to start losing interest in Donald Trump?
Well, great question, and somewhat unpredictable because this is so unprecedented, all of this stuff. But in recent history, whenever he's indicted, whenever there's a news cycle that talks, that has any of his enemies trying to, weaponize the justice system against him, he does better in the polls. When they raided Mar-a-Lago, he went from +9 over DeSantis to +39. He picked up 30 points. The Alvin Bragg indictment, he picked up, something closer to 10 points because he was already up, quite a bit more. But so look, I don't think the base needs strengthening, though. I mean, the base is going to stick with him, as Anthony Scaramucci said, no matter what. Where I disagree with Anthony is look, the other people in the party that can be critics of the president and opponents of the president. And I include myself that often criticize the president. I would prefer another candidate. I would vote for Ron DeSantis if the election was tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that you can't understand that there is this double standard and that there is some weaponization going on. So I think you can be both. You saw some of his, again, opponents and critics come out and say, this is crazy. This is a bad precedent to set. Remember, the Republicans will will win the White House, whether it's in 24 or 28, and there will be a Republican Justice Department. And I think that the parties have been very reluctant to weaponize the justice system. And that precedent has really, that norm has been broken here. Okay. And so what would a Republican Justice Department do about the Biden, bribery scandal, which interestingly enough came out the same day? Was it a coincidence that Merrick Garland announced this indictment 2 hours later because of the bribery scandal information, the FBI 1023 document that had to be subpoenaed by the Congress to the Justice Department? So there's a lot of moving parts here, Alexis. But to answer your question directly, in the near term, he'll get a bump. In the long term, I think it fades. After Alvin Bragg, 20% of DeSantis supporters flipped to Trump. Okay. So it's those people that, might get ginned up about this kind of activity from the Justice Department. They'll swing over to Trump because they see him as a victim, but that might fade.
Okay. Just one last thing briefly, if you wouldn't mind, because we're tight for time, Greg. The entrance of Mike Pence and Chris Christie into the race, they've come forward to seek the Republican nomination to run for president. How does that affect the race for the White House for the Republicans?
Not much right now. I mean, look, when you're polling below 5%, you don't really have a great chance. But, the last three winners of Iowa were Republicans that polled under 5% in June of the prior year. So it's a little early, but it still looks like DeSantis is the real credible, opponent right now for Trump.